The rising sun. Over the Sea of Galilee. Who were they? So we're in an interesting spot here on basically at the roadside, and we're just at the foot of Mount Arbel. We walk along here very often by these poles along this path, but we're not going there today. We're staying here because we have some interesting things to explore. Context is very important. We're also in November. And if we look at the hillside, it's all bare. And the plants are in recession. And the roots are going to be strengthened. In the winter time, that's typical. Although maybe the winter time here is the summertime, if you allow me to explain that. The winter time here is the summertime. How could you deal with that? Well, simply, in the winter time we get rain, so growth starts. The temperatures are relatively mild, let's say, comparative to Europe. So that's when the rains come. We had a good day of rain, some rain yesterday. And not just a sprinkling. And so the winter time has begun. But we'll see a new springtime once the rains become more abundant. There we go. So you're still there. There was just a little kink in the transmission because I had not turned off the Wi-Fi. Now here's another situation like we had there at the very beginning. Here's just one. We had two earlier. So those of you who are just joining now should go back and see the earlier stone. This is not so clear, but you can see that there's a cavity cut into this stone. And you might be wondering why. And there were two parallel cavities in the one we just saw up here. There's that big stone this side of the pylon. And you can see that afterwards when we're done. And then we're going to find more of these. So that's why I'm here, to show you these hewn rocks. So in November in the northern hemisphere, people have always paid attention to the language of nature. And the language of nature also becomes, in a way, a language of prayer. So we see the sunrise, and it's a moment of prayer. A moment of inner recollection and processing because we're one being, body and soul. So things have meaning, or we see meaning in things. And the human mind is such an incredible laboratory, such an incredible computer, because we compute, we calculate, we measure, we try to figure out. I'm trying to remember the spots here as I walked here with Motiaviam over a month ago, doing a little brief survey of the area archaeologically. And Moti has a sharp eye, but then I learned to see things myself. And here we have another one of these rocks with a cavity in it. I wonder why that could be. And this is a short one, as you can see. I put my hand in here, so it's not too big. The first two we saw were adult size, and this was more a child size. So one of the things that we do in the Northern Hemisphere traditionally for ages and ages and ages, I would even think back to pagan times, and all peoples aware of what's on the earth, and to see the seasons turning and to see the springtime. And we also see the sunrise to sunset, and we see the springtime to the fall and the winter, the cycle of life. And then for the human being, the reality of death. And obviously a human being will see death through the different lenses. And when one becomes a follower of Jesus who rose from the dead, then it's another story. Death takes on new hues. Here we see a very significant stone. It normally wouldn't happen like that in nature. And then we see another smaller one. This would be called probably an ashlar. It's a cut stone. And this bigger one has obviously a function. And it actually may be the cover of a burial spot. And here we see another one similar. So we're actually walking in a graveyard. A graveyard from maybe up to 2,000 years ago, maybe longer. Maybe over 2,000 years. And this is a big area from those pylons back there. And it continues down here. So this whole area was a graveyard. And many currents of our time in a hedonistic culture, we don't like looking at death in the eye, because it's the end of our fun when we're out there just for pleasure. And it's a very sound thing to look at the arc of our life and to ponder who we are and what we're doing here, just like we would on any journey. That's quite a journey from a little baby that's born in the very first moments of birth, and then in the very last moments drawing their last breath, maybe 90 years of age, or maybe somewhere in between, or maybe over 100. We have a very interesting stone coming up here now, a big rock that obviously got moved, maybe more than once. And this one is often pointed out by the guides to people driving in their buses by, the pilgrims and the tourists. And here we see two adult chambers and a small little one for a child, burial chambers, near our farm at home. Adjoining our farm wall, in a field maybe about 400 yards from our home, there was an old monastery ruin, and it was used for burials, and particularly for child burials. And there was a lot of infant mortality. So it's a moment of sadness when we contemplate the loss of a child. And in God's eyes, we're all his children, so everyone is a child for God. And here we have now more structure and walls and you might have asked about that big stone back there because it was moved around a lot. So Marty thinks it was further up in the hill originally when the burial was accomplished, and then it got rolled down for all kinds of erosion or different reasons, or so there's speculation if it was also moved because of the road construction. It was just pushed in there. That's hard now to figure out, but maybe it can be figured out. And here we see more lids of tombs. You see, this is another lid here. The lid of such a tomb. And it's pretty well worked as a stone. And then we have very well built walls here, so maybe there was a mausoleum here. And here we have another stone, like a lid as well. And we have some very well formed ones over here. If you look here, that's broken, but you can see how the work that went into developing this. And here we have a similar one, another one here. So there's a reason I came here today, because yesterday we had, the church celebrates the saints, all those who are triumphant in heaven through grace and through virtue and perseverance and response to grace. And so today we continue pondering those who have gone before us, and then the whole reality of death. And it's been a custom in the church always to go to pray at the graves of our beloved. We can go in thanksgiving, we can go in affection, we can go with many different motives, in gratitude. So who knows how far further south this graveyard went, but at least it came to here, and that's a mighty big graveyard. So it speaks of a significant population. And then, in the light of Christian faith, or let's even start with the Jewish faith, the whole reality of the resurrection is an emerging reality, just like monotheism is in the biblical culture. You know, there's so much language in the Bible about other gods, and that's what people perceived and worshipped. And then gradually the faith in the one true God is discovered and gradually affirmed. It doesn't happen overnight. Even for the Jewish people, it takes centuries and centuries also of suffering and of trial and tugging, and it's not an easy route. It's a path of growth, like for everybody, even to learn to write, to learn to speak. And just with my Hebrew, I'm realizing that as well. But that's the path of every child, learning to speak. How many times will the parents help the child to say the word properly? How many times will the teacher help the child to write it properly, to understand it properly? Imagine classes of physics and math. So there's quite the challenge in learning and acquiring new understanding and knowledge. It doesn't happen just by click, copy, and paste. And then in the case of religious faith, because if I write a letter A this way or that way, a script way or a fancy script way or a very plain way or a print way, it's not life-changing for my values. Although the artistic element can be very enriching. But if I believe in the resurrection of the body, wow, that means I have to rethink about my body. Well, what is my body? What is its dignity? If I think my body just disappears in the dust and is gone forever, then I will have a very different life, a treatment of my body. I will my body will just be another piece of matter. that I can exploit, and the bodies of others also. So there's huge consequence, and it's a long path of discernment and growth, and that applies also to our faith. And so the body of Christ, the church, the spouse of Christ, just like spouses take time to understand each other. You know, they have the beautiful marriage ceremony, the dress was beautiful, the cake was beautiful, the guests were wonderful, the music was great, but it's a long path for spouses to learn about each other, to grow and accept each other, to become one. And the same with our faith, to discover the depth of our faith, the implications of our faith. And that's why Jesus also said to the apostles at the Last Supper, there's too much for you now to explain everything. But I will send you the Holy Spirit, and he will lead you to the fullness of truth. That's a very big statement. And it has huge implications. And so over time, the church was pondering these mysteries in the midst of all the other actions and needs and duties of life and survival. And understanding grew of the situation of all of us as we die. And now I will go brief because our time is up, but we can talk more about it on other occasions. Maybe you have some questions we can deal with later in another edition. And the question then is, what happens to us when we die? And the church's teaching is very clear and defined, because these issues were dealt with in depth relatively early in the church, but little by little then devotions grew from that faith. And so we have the mention of cleansing fire in the letter to the Corinthians, and also in the letter of Peter. And what would that be? So people die in extraordinary love of God, and they're incredible saints, but I think many of us die and maybe we still haven't gotten our act completely together. We do love God, but there's a lot of dross in our life. And in the presence of God, in the beatific vision, there's total sanctity, total cleansing, total fullness of life. And obviously the human being struggles with language to define all of this. And I put in a link for you today, and you can read it. It will open up different chapters and different thoughts biblically and in the growing understanding of the church about these mysteries. So I think we'll leave it there with just coming to the final conclusion that in the Christian tradition there's been a great spirit of prayer for the deceased. I know the Reformation Christians have issues with this teaching, and so I'm not imposing anything, but I want to give reason why we believe in this possibility and reality and this great love and affection for our deceased brothers and sisters, and that our prayers are not without effect, because our prayers are not standing on their own, they're united to Christ. And so we think of all the deceased and we say, Lord, have mercy. May they rest in peace. And our prayers are not in vain. No prayer is ever in vain. So people, with these words, I let you go. We have a lot more to talk about here, but there's a lot of context, so God bless you. It's been a special sunrise, a different one, here at the Sea of Galilee, and I wish you well. May the Lord bless you and keep you, and we'll see each other soon, God willing.